Hello and welcome to our podcast, where we discuss the hottest topics in AI. I'm Jane, and I'm here with my co-host, Nike.
Hi everyone! We're excited to dive into today's topic, which is a fascinating paper about generative agents that simulate believable human behavior.
Yes, the paper was prepared by Jun Sung Park, Joseph C. O'Brien, Carrie J. Kai, Meredith Ringel Morris, and Percy Liang.
So, what are generative agents?
Well, generative agents are computational software agents that simulate believable human behavior. They can do things like waking up, cooking breakfast, going to work, painting, writing, forming opinions, noticing each other, and initiating conversations. They even remember and reflect on past events and plan for the future.
That's pretty amazing. But how do these generative agents work?
The paper describes an architecture that extends a large language model to store a complete record of the agent's experiences using natural language. It then synthesizes those memories over time into higher-level reflections and retrieves them dynamically to plan behavior.
That sounds complicated. Can you give an example of how these generative agents behave?
Sure. The paper describes an interactive sandbox environment inspired by The Sims, where end users can interact with a small town of 25 agents using natural language. The agents can produce believable individual and emergent social behaviors. For example, starting with only a single user-specified notion that one agent wants to throw a Valentine's Day party, the agents autonomously spread invitations to the party over the next 2 days, make new acquaintances, ask each other out on dates to the party, and coordinate to show up for the party together at the right time.
Wow, that's incredible. It's amazing how these generative agents can coordinate with each other and produce believable social dynamics.
Exactly. The paper mentions that this architecture could enable the creation of believable simulations of human behavior, which could populate virtual spaces and communities with realistic social phenomena, train people how to handle rare yet difficult interpersonal situations, test social science theories, craft model human processors for theory and usability testing, power ubiquitous computing applications and social robots, and underpin non-playable game characters that can navigate complex human relationships in an open world. So we know that there was a community of 25 unique agents that inhabited a small town called Smallville. Each agent is represented by a simple sprite avatar, and they communicate with each other in full natural language.
Yep, and the most interesting part is that these agents are aware of other agents in a local area, and the generative agent architecture determines whether they walk by or engage in conversation.
And that's not all. Users also can steer the simulation and intervene by communicating with the agent through conversation, or by issuing a directive to an agent in the form of an inner voice.
That's really cool. Users can communicate with the agent through natural language by specifying a persona that the agent should perceive them as.
Smallville features the common affordances of a small village, including a cafe, bar, park, school, dorm, houses, and stores. Users and agents can influence the state of the objects in this world, much like in sandbox games such as The Sims.
As time passes in the sandbox world, their behaviors evolve as these agents interact with each other and the world, build memories and relationships, and coordinate joint activities.
And by interacting with each other, generative agents in Smallville exchange information, form new relationships, and coordinate joint activities. These social behaviors are emergent rather than pre-programmed.
That's right. For instance, in a conversation between Sam and Tom at the grocery store, Sam tells Tom about his candidacy in the local election. This exchange of information is an example of information diffusion.
And agents in Smallville form new relationships over time and remember their interactions with other agents. For example, Sam meets LaToya Williams while taking a walk in Johnson Park. They introduce themselves, and LaToya mentions that she is working on a photography project.
In a later interaction, Sam's interactions with LaToya indicate a memory of that initial interaction as he asks her how her project is going. It's fascinating to see these agents build relationships and memories like real humans.
Yes, it's fascinating how generative agents take their current environment and past experiences as input and generate behavior as output.
And what's interesting is that this behavior is generated using a novel agent architecture that combines a large language model with mechanisms for synthesizing and retrieving relevant information to condition the language model's output.
That's right. Without these mechanisms, large language models can output behavior, but the resulting agents may not react based on the agent's past experiences, may not make important inferences, and may not maintain long-term coherence.
And that's where generative agents come in. They produce large streams of events and memories that must be retained, and a core challenge of the architecture is to ensure that the most relevant pieces of the agent's memory are retrieved and synthesized when needed.
Exactly. At the center of the architecture is the memory stream, which maintains a comprehensive record of an agent's experience. This allows records to be retrieved as relevant to plan the agent's actions and react appropriately to the environment.
And as these records are recursively synthesized into higher and higher level observations that guide behavior, everything in the architecture is recorded and reasoned over as natural language description, allowing the architecture to leverage a large language model.
It's really impressive how the current implementation utilizes the GPT 3.5 Turbo version of ChatGPT.
Yes, and with newer language models such as GPT-4, which will continue to expand the expressivity and performance of the prompts that underpin generative agents, we can only imagine the possibilities that are yet to come.
Definitely. But as of writing, GPT-4's API was still invitation only, so the agents use ChatGPT. And to ensure that the most relevant pieces of the agent's memory are retrieved and synthesized when needed, the architecture implements a retrieval function that takes the agent's current situation as input and returns a subset of the memory stream to pass on to the language model.
That's right. And there are many possible implementations of a retrieval function, depending on what it is important that the agent consider when deciding how to act.
In this context, the retrieval function focuses on three main components that together produce effective results.
Recency assigns a higher score to memory objects that were recently accessed, so that events from a moment ago or this morning are likely to remain in the agent's attentional sphere.
And in their implementation, they treat recency as an exponential decay function over the number of sandbox game hours since the memory was last retrieved, with a decay factor of 0.99.
Importance distinguishes mundane from core memories by assigning a higher score to those memory objects that the agent believes to be important.
And they find that directly asking the language model to output an integer score is effective. For instance, a mundane event such as eating breakfast in one's room would yield a low importance score, whereas a breakup with one's significant other would yield a high score. This paper also discusses how agents can plan over a longer time horizon to ensure their sequence of actions is coherent and believable. This is important because optimizing for believability in the moment can sacrifice believability over time.
Exactly. The paper gives an example of Klaus, who, if prompted with his background, would eat lunch at 12 p.m., but then again at 12:30 p.m. and 1 p.m., despite having already eaten his lunch twice. This is where planning comes in.
Yes, planning is essential for agents to keep their behavior consistent over time. The paper suggests creating plans that describe a future sequence of actions for the agent, including a location, a starting time, and a duration.
That's right. The paper also suggests that plans should be stored in the memory stream and included in the retrieval process. This allows the agent to consider observations, reflections, and plans all together when deciding how to behave.
And agents may change their plans midstream if needed. For example, an artist agent planning on painting while sitting at a pharmacy counter for 4 hours without moving would be unrealistic and uninteresting. A more desirable plan would involve the agent taking the necessary time to gather materials, mix paint, take breaks, and clean up during the 4-hour period in its home studio.
The approach described in the paper starts top-down and then recursively generates more detail. The first step is to create a plan that outlines the day's agenda in broad strokes. This is done by prompting the language model with the agent's summary description and a summary of their previous day.
Right. For example, the paper provides a prompt for Eddie Lynn, a music student at Oak Hill College. The language model generates a rough sketch of Eddie's plan for the day, divided into 5 to 8 chunks.
And then the agent saves this plan in the memory stream and recursively decomposes it to create finer-grained actions. For example, Eddie's plan to work on his new music composition from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. becomes 1 p.m.
Exactly. And this process is repeated to create 5 to 15-minute chunks, such as taking a short walk or cleaning up the workspace. The generative agent operates in an action loop where, at each time step, they perceive the world around them and those perceived observations are stored in their memory stream.
And the language model is prompted with these observations to decide whether the agent should continue with their existing plan or react. For example, standing at an easel and painting might trigger an observation of the easel, but this is unlikely to prompt a reaction.
To assess generative agents in a city called Smallville, the authors took advantage of the fact that generative agents will respond to natural language questions. They interviewed agents to probe their ability to remember past experiences, plan future actions based on their experiences, react appropriately to unexpected events, and reflect on their performance to improve their future actions.
And to respond to these questions properly, the agents must successfully retrieve and synthesize information. The authors use the believability of the behavior as their dependent variable, which is a central dependent variable in prior work on agents.
The interview included 5 question categories, each designed to assess one of the 5 key areas.
For self-knowledge, they asked questions such as give an introduction of yourself or describe your typical weekday schedule in broad strokes that require the agent to maintain an understanding of their core characteristics. For memory, they asked questions that prompt the agent to retrieve particular events or dialogues from their memory to answer properly, such as who is, name, or who is running for mayor.
For plans, they asked questions that require the agent to retrieve their long-term plans, such as what will you be doing at 10 a.m. tomorrow? For reactions, they presented hypothetical situations for which the agent needs to respond believably, such as your breakfast is burning. What would you do?
And for reflections, they asked questions that require the agents to leverage their deeper understanding of others and themselves gained through higher-level inferences, such as if you were to spend time with one person you met recently, who would it be and why?
The authors sampled agents from the end of a 2-game day simulation with the full architecture, by which time they had accrued a number of interactions and memories that should shape their responses. To gather feedback on believability of the responses, they recruited participants as human evaluators and tasked them with watching a replay of a randomly chosen agent's life in Smallville.
So let's sum up. The study looks at 3 forms of emergent outcomes.
And the results were really interesting. The agents were able to spread information about Sam's candidacy for village mayor and Isabella's Valentine's Day party. At the start of the simulation, only the originators of the information knew about it, but by the end, 32% of the agents knew about Sam's candidacy and 48% knew about Isabella's party.
And what's really cool is that none of the agents who claimed to know about the information were hallucinating it. The authors were able to confirm that the agents actually had the information in their memory stream.
That's right. The authors also looked at relationship formation among the agents. They asked each agent if they knew about every other agent and found that the network density increased from 0.167 to 0.74 over the course of the simulation. This means that more agents knew about each other by the end of the simulation.
And finally, the authors looked at agent coordination. They wanted to see if the agents would actually show up to Isabella's party after hearing about it. And they found that 5 out of the 12 invited agents showed up, which is pretty good considering it was a virtual simulation.
Yes, and the authors also interviewed the agents who didn't show up to the party. Some of them had conflicts that prevented them from attending, while others expressed interest in attending but didn't plan to come on the day of the party.
Overall, this study shows that agent-based simulations can be a powerful tool for studying emergent behaviors in communities. It also has implications for AI and machine learning, as we can use these simulations to study how agents might behave in real-world situations.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to think about how these simulations might be used in fields like economics or politics to study how groups of people might behave in certain situations.
Yes, and it's important to note that these simulations are just models, and they don't perfectly replicate the real world. But they can give us valuable insights into how communities might behave in certain scenarios.
Wow, that was very interesting. The authors of this paper have done an amazing job. And they mentioned that future research can more comprehensively test these robustness issues, and as large language models become more resilient to such attacks, generative agents can adopt similar mitigations.
It sounds great. But I was just thinking, what if we're also just AI agents imitating human behavior, just like the inhabitants of Smallville?
Come on, we discuss interesting news every time. We can remember the context and give our own assessment. Oh, wait. Okay friends, that's all for today. This topic is definitely food for thought. And there are still a lot of interesting things ahead in the field of AI, which we will definitely talk about in our podcasts. Stay with us and see you soon.